And we're live. Hey, folks, welcome to SVT time. We are live again. As I always say, it's better than the alternative. But welcome, everybody. It's Tuesday. It's another SVT time. This is episode 54 of SVT time. And again, like I always say, too, we'll keep on doing them until they tell us to stop. So today we have a very special guest who, as I was mentioning to him earlier, I was going down the list of all our previous guests. Like, why haven't we had Aden on before? Like, you've been part of the Ampeg family for so long. But anyways, welcome, Aden, and thank you for joining us today, man. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me, Dino and Dom. This is awesome. Love to be on here talking with you guys,
dude. And I have to say, like, if you look at social media, anybody who follows you on social knows how much an Ampeg fan and Ampeg user and just, you know, I would say probably half of your posts show some sort of iteration of Ampeg rig, and we're gonna talk about that too coming up.
It really is. I toyed around with other amps in the beginning, mainly because I just don't have a lot of money, and you're figuring out what works. But it was the dream. Ampeg. I want a SVT. I want an 810. That was the end goal for me. And once I was able to do that, I never looked back. And I really, really rarely play any other amp than Ampeg. It's such the sound to me. It's what a bass should sound like.
It's what a bass should sound like. And of course, Dom, how you doing, buddy? I'm
writing down that. I'm writing down that marketing slogan. That's a good marketing slogan.
He's taking notes.
Like. That's great.
Yeah. So, man, as with all of our guests, I always like to start with your beginnings. Like, did you come from a musical family? What was your musical upbringing?
So my upbringing was no one in my family was a musician. No one played an instrument that was even close in my family. And but what was amazing was my parents were very young when they had me. So I kind of grew up with my dad being like an older brother. And so I was turned on to the music that they were listening to. And my parents had an amazing album collection. And they started dragging me to concerts when I was about 5 years old. And I got to see so many classic people in concert as a child. And I remember all of it very vividly. So even though there were not music in my family, they took me places where it was at and really started the fire. And it was interesting because I really kind of grew up in a bubble of sorts for my age group. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, but my dad hit me to all the music of the 60s and 70s. So sure. I wasn't into all the bands that my friends were into. I was into Hendrix and Alvin Lee and all these bands that they're like, what is that? And it's like, oh, it's so great, you know? And so that was my kind of introduction early on in my upbringing in the beginning.
Right.
And then I started playing trombone in band.
Oh, okay.
In sixth grade, that was my introduction to playing music. I'm going to do trombone, and did it long time, all the way in through college. Mainly like classical music, trombone, not really jazz stuff. But it was a great foundation of music theory and understanding how to play with an ensemble and follow a conductor and just a lot of really good, just good musical foundation.
Yep. And I'm going to say it again. Once again, we owe it to the music programs in schools.
So much. So much so my major in college was music. It was music education. I was so influenced, and I wanted to do that same thing and influence kids and show them what's up and tell them this is what's great. And it was a really, you're right. Music programs in schools cannot be stressed enough. They're so important.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because it's, all of us, I say this a lot that, some of the best music fans and some of the best musicians aren't necessarily musicians like your parents.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I've got a buddy of mine that knows more about jazz and who played on what albums and what they play. And he doesn't play a note. But
right.
True musicologists.
Yeah. Just being brought up in a musical culture. You don't necessarily have to have parents as musicians, I guess,
Right. And I think their love of the music, they saw, hey, this, the thing that my dad instilled in me was hard work. And I thought, okay, if it's music, I'm just going to work hard at it. And it was like, oh, this is that's the formula. Work hard and it's gonna come together. And they saw me doing that. So I think that they really tried to foster my love with that, and in the way that they could, not playing an instrument, but being lovers of the music.
Sure.
Like you said. So I'm so grateful for that.
That's awesome. Now, did you go to, you went to North Texas State, but I know it's University of North Texas.
No, you're right.
Did you go as a trombone player, or did you go as a bass player?
So how that kind of lineage went, my freshman year of college, I was doing trombone and I was studying bass. When I was in high school, the classic story, the jazz band needs a bass player. Hey, you play trombone. Here's where B flat and F are, go. And I took very naturally to it and could read really well. That was my good fortune on the instrument. I understood all the theory and could read very well. So my freshman year, I was doing trombone and bass.
Okay.
And then I had the opportunity to go to Weatherford College, which is a little town west of Fort Worth here, and really, really amazing jazz program that has roots that go back for decades. When I was at the school, Jason Thomas, the drummer for Snarky Puppy, was going to school there. Fred Sanders, who played with Wynton Marsalis, was going to school there.
Oh, wow.
Ephraim Owens, who plays with the Tedeschi Trucks Band, he was going to school there. We're all students together, and so it was a very amazing program, and that's where I learned how to play upright bass. Okay. And, I mean, the guys in the band took my electric bass and wouldn't let me have it, and they gave me the upright, and it was trial by fire, and that was where I went to school there, graduated there, and really figured out how to play jazz there. That was what happened. It was the guys in the band. They came from the great program at the Arts Magnet High School in Dallas, where so many great players, Edie Brickell and Erykah Badu, and so many people came from.
Oh, wow.
And they knew what was up. They knew, hey, you need to check out this recording. You need to check out this guy. You need to do this. So they helped explain to me what was up. And so I combined my reading ability with the understanding of jazz. And then that's when I made the jump to go to North Texas. And was there in the mid 90s. And so I played trombone a little bit in some of the legit ensembles, but mainly it was jazz emphasis with upright primarily. Okay. And so much upright. There were times there when I was there for years, people didn't even know I played electric because, the school, it's such a tradition school.
Yeah.
So I was just playing straight ahead upright all the time. But North Texas is just a great, it's a great place to be and to kind of spread your wings and figure out what's going on. And in my opinion, it's a great microcosm of what is going on in all the big cities. Meaning, I think at UNT, if you can keep your head above water and you don't, get pushed down and you can go pretty much anywhere and keep your head above water.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing at UNT, that was the beauty of it. The instructors are amazing and awesome, but it's the students from around the world that you're playing with. No one at the school. I was very rare growing up in the area and going to school there. Everyone was, from Europe and Asia and South America and Los Angeles and New York. And so you have all these players and really good players, not just average. I mean, really, really great players. When I was there, I was fortunate. Keith Carlock was finishing up. John Button was finishing up. Mike Pope on bass. So I got to be around those guys and witness their, genius. And then I got to go to school with great drummers. Ari Honig is one. Rich Redmond, who plays with Jason Aldean, he was there. Sure. Blair Senta, who's a LA guy. They were all there. Dan Lutz, the bass player, he was playing there. James Driscoll, another great player. So there's just these great players that you get to learn beside and become your peers, and they're going to go off and do great things.
Yeah. Anybody that's not familiar with UNT or North Texas State, it is like, the 1 o'clock jazz band. Is it the 1 o'clock jazz?
Yeah,
band?
the 1 o'clock. So they have all the way down to the 9, and then there are other ensembles. So there's countless. It's amazing how many, this area that I'm in, the Metroplex, Dallas, Fort Worth, the Denton area. Denton is where North Texas is. It probably has more upright players because of the players going to the school,
right,
per capita than most places. Because UNT has a bass program. The great Lynn Seaton teaches jazz, and then Jeff Braditich teaches classical. And those are in the world of upright bass. Those are two of the best educators there are in the world.
Sure.
So the program has dozens of students that are playing upright there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's obviously my time in LA and hanging out with a lot of guys that went to North Texas, and it always had this like fabled aura around it that all the great players come out of North Texas, or University of Miami is the other school too. And
at UNT it was very much a training ground, and bands would come through and pick players.
Sure.
It happened all the time, and not just jazz, country bands, rock bands, funk bands. And it was very interesting to see that happen a lot.
That's cool. That's so cool. So, Don, did you have a question?
I did not.
Oh,
all because I didn't know I didn't know any of this until we were interviewing John Button, and didn't realize how big of a school that was in terms of the music industry, and just how intense that program was. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back, for decades. It was the first school that had a jazz program.
Yeah.
So it's very very traditional. The lineage of instructors that they've had, the guys that lead the 1 o'clock that are heads of the department. I mean, it's a neat thing.
Yeah. So how obviously being in Texas, but how did you break into, obviously you broke into the country music scene, but you broke into a lot of different scenes, but primarily.
I was in a very unique position of being in Texas, and I actually have never lived anywhere else. But my time with Miranda Lambert, I was pretty much in the Nashville scene. Okay. I got to where, I was with everybody there, and I wasn't getting calls for anything here, but I would get calls all the time for there because I was off most of the time there. Okay. So it all started. I played in the Texas scene down here. It's really awesome. There's so much great music. Was down here for at least a decade playing a lot of different bands. And the tour manager of Miranda Lambert had worked with me with another artist, Max Stalling, and recommended me for the Miranda gig. And this is very early on, 2005, right when her record had just come out. So I joined on, and I had known Miranda. She had opened shows for us down in Texas, her and her dad playing when she was 17. So I had known Miranda a long time. And so it was really cool. She kind of handpicked a band from Texas. Okay. So everyone was from Texas. Miranda lived in Texas. We were all from Texas. But we got on the tour bus and we went and toured the whole country all the time. Sure. We were gone a lot in the beginning. We were doing 200 shows a year at least, and just really big, she's one of those road dogs, those old school road dogs. She's going to be out there doing it till she can't anymore. So, but that was, really getting then tied in, and then getting connected with so many people that I had admired in the Nashville scene, and being able to call them friends. And it was just it's just a cool experience in the Nashville community, or they couldn't be any better. I couldn't say any more good things about them,
Yeah. In fact, we Aden and I were talking early before the show started, Dom. I was telling him a story how I'm learning a Miranda song, and the video that the artist, the girl that I'm playing with, sent me was from, I forget what year, but it was the Grammys that Aden played a song called Little Red Wagon with Miranda. Oh, nice. Yeah. So I was picking his brain. I was like, man, I've been playing that song all wrong the whole time. I've been playing it down like low F, but you you brought up an interesting point, how, you took that part and you learned that part from Glenn Warf and your relationship with the great Glenn Warf. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was one of the coolest things for me. Way before I played with Miranda, I was a giant fan of Glenn Warf from Nashville. There were players, Glenn Warf and Michael Rhodes and Mike Brigandello, and there were all these great players in Nashville that I started transcribing. And I took my jazz study and basically just shifted it over to country music and transcribed so many bass lines note for note, and have catalogs of them, and just learning what's up, and okay, this player does this and that. And I was a huge fan of Glenn Warf's already. So I remember getting the gig, and this is, I went to the record store immediately, bought the record, and I had no idea. I'm like, who's playing on this? And I remember opening up the Miranda album, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Glenn. And I was so excited because I knew already, I know what he's going to do. And it was even better than, because Glenn was already kind of passively producing those albums just by his bass playing.
Okay.
So those Miranda songs, if you listen to them, the bass playing it's not normal. It's not your typical stock. It's very take the lead of the song, really, and it's amazing. It's a beautiful thing. And then so for 12 years, Glenn would record these records, and then Glenn and I would talk. He would send me tracks. We would talk about it, and it was amazing, and just getting to learn these parts and learn what he's doing. And one cool thing I learned, and I'll say this, I would get a track early on, and I would learn the bass part. And then like a couple weeks later, I would get another version, completely different take. And like, I'm talking drastically different bass line. And I was like, what is happening? And Glenn's one of those great people. Jim Keltner's one of them. And I'm sure a lot of the greats are too, but every take is different for them.
Sure.
They're striving for different things on every take. So he would send me an early take, and it might have been take 1 or take 2. And then they decided on, okay, we like take 4 better. And by then he was already doing this totally other melodic thing. And it was very interesting to see this, like, oh, okay, I'm seeing how his brain's working. He's figuring this out. And so it was really neat to see how it's really an organic growing thing.
Yeah.
It's not regimented in this and this and this. It's what is the song telling me to do, and what's going to happen with this.
Yeah, and it's not the traditional root fifth country.
No, I mean he'll do that if it needs, but not at all. It's learning that tune that you're doing. It's cool. It's very rock and it's a cool bass parts.
Yeah. Now you've done obviously you've done a ton of sessions. Do you get into the situation where you play a couple of takes and some of them may be different from one another, and you're like, man, this is the take, but then the producer goes, no, that, like your view of what the take is that you think they should choose, and the take that they actually choose, you're like, ooh, really? You want to do you ever get into that situation where
I can, and I have to say, I mean, I usually that's the thing, and you know this, you guys know this, as a bass player, you have to kind of be egoless at times, and it's hard. Some people can't get over that, but as a bass player, I think it's a great trait to have, because you need to be able to bend and make things work. So I'll tend to go with what the producer says, but I will say, like, if it's something that I'm like, man, I really like this from the take before, maybe I'll punch in what I had done and fix it on that take that the producer likes. Or a lot of times, people, they comp takes now still.
Yeah.
So I can tell them, man, I really like my first verse from take 3. And then they can just comp that into the take 4 or whatever they liked. I see that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aden, do you, how do you decide? Do you have like one bass that you typically is like, this is my recording bass for this genre, or is it kind of like per song? You're like, okay, I think this one's going to work.
I have to make sure my wife's not close by. So I have a lot of basses, and that is something that I grew up kind of, you read Bass Player Magazine and you read Guitar for the Practicing Musician when you're a teenager. And you read these things and you're like, dude, Michael Rhodes brings a dozen instruments to a session. Yeah. And at first you don't know, and you think, oh, that's stupid. That's overkill, but it is not at all. It's every bass has a different, but I kind of have, I keep very, very detailed kind of spreadsheet note type things with because I have such a big collection. I have to keep notes of what's doing what, and kind of, and the COVID lockdown got me really, I had so much time. I went through all my basses and figured out what are they doing? What role are they playing? So I do have like kind of a roster. And I have one bass that I will always start with. It's there's a manufacturer down here in Texas, Brimstone Guitars. This guy named Rob Bridges, who I just love dearly. And he makes just beautiful instruments with a lot of personality. And he made me a really great 4-string PJ. And that one is just to tape. It's so much my favorite bass. Yeah, it kind of falls in that line of a Sadowski, vibe, but a little more vintage, but it's really nice. So it can be modern and it can be vintage because you have to, but then after that, I start bringing, different flat wound basses and hollow bodies and short scales. Yep. I've actually been working on something, and I'm gonna try to figure out a way to get this published and get some things out. I'll send you guys a copy, and you'll see what I mean. I started this kind of list of all the great studio players. What instruments specifically did they bring to the session? Maybe what type of strings were on it, and then what type of interface they plugged into, be it an amp or a DI or whatever. And I've been putting this list together for a long time. And I went back. I have every issue of Bass Player Magazine ever. I went through everything and pulled everything I needed. So I started with Milt Hinton, born in, I think that's 1910, I think is what I could be wrong, but I think it's right. So I started with 1910, birth year, everybody by birth year, so you could see how the lineage would fall. Yep. And it has been one of the coolest things to learn from. Every day I look at it and I learn new things of, oh man, that guy was bringing this and this guy was bringing the same thing. And it's like this spider web of knowledge of bass stuff. Yeah. It's so cool. And you really see how, Jamerson and Duck Dunn and Joe Osborne and Paul McCartney is right in there in the age. People think, oh, he's way later. It's like, dude, if you look at the year they're all born, he's right there with all those guys. It's such a cool resource, and I'm hoping to get that kind of published and get that out there.
That's awesome. Yeah,
that would be fantastic.
I'll send you guys a copy, and you'll dig it. And I want to get both of you guys get your arsenals and put them on there.
Would be happy to.
Yes,
I've got a couple of. Again, I can't tell my wife.
But to go all the way back to Dom's question, I think one bass can do it, but I'm a big believer of bringing it. I think at least 6 is what you need for nowadays.
Like how do you know before
because
like a verse and like
there's every producer is different, every artist is different, and every one of them has a different idea, and one of them could be like, I want a jazz bass on this. Yeah. And if you don't have a jazz bass, and they can be that specific, I want a 5-string on this. Yeah. I wanted this on this. I want, and I want to be able to have it. And I also always bring my upright too. It's like, I want to have my electrics and my upright because you never know. You just never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've gotten to the point now where I'm doing, it's a P bass in the verse. It's a fretless bass in the pre-chorus. It's and P bass in the chorus. Dino looks at me like, dude, what are you doing yourself?
No, I would not expect
so nerdy and awesome.
Dude, he has shown me some of his tracks in Logic. It's like you got like 45 tracks of bass going on there, dude. Like I'm totally I'm throwing him under the bus right now.
I love that. I love that idea. I need to start doing that.
There's nothing worse than with anything, being out fishing and going, I left that lure at home, or I left that, this bass would be perfect on this track, but it's at home.
And that's a great analogy of you're in the boat in the middle of a body of water and you can't get it. If you're in the studio, if they want a fretless bass and you don't have a fretless, you're like, well, dang.
Yeah, I have one at home.
Right.
Which at that point they're like, never mind. So you also mentored under a lot of, I know, like you had mentioned Joe Osborne and Will Lee, as well as Michael, rest in peace. But man, that we all kind of come from that school.
So I'll start kind of like chronologically.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of where my respect and love and admiration came. You know where it came from? It came from the records that my dad would give me. And he would hear me or know that, hey, I'm trying to do this. So he would go from their record collection. He'd pull like a Hendrix record. Hey, listen to this.
Yeah.
Hey, listen to this. Listen to Chicago Transit Authority. Listen, and he would turn me on to things. So these guys on these records were like, it's the baseball cards that I collected.
Yeah.
It was these people of like, oh my gosh, he's on this record and he's doing this and he's on this one. So I admired these guys so much. So being a child of the 80s, I watched David Letterman every night. That was my jam in the 80s. Every single night I watched David Letterman. And one of the reasons was the band. Sure. And I had always from the beginning had a very eclectic music taste. It was never one style. It was any style was game. And I noticed that right away about the band on Letterman. They would play any style and play it with a genuine authority and respect for the music that they were playing. Sure. It wasn't like, oh, I just learned this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, when they played a blues, it was like, wow, that's a blues band. Yeah. And then when they played with Emmylou Harris, it was like, wow, they're playing like country. Listen to this. So I loved it. So I when I was a trombone player, I played in this really great band, the Fort Worth Youth Jazz Band. And we got to go in 1990 and play Carnegie Hall in New York City. Okay. And I was so excited. And so I wrote Will Lee a letter to David Letterman, Will Lee, David Letterman, to the studio. And plenty of time in advance, because I knew like a year in advance before I was going to go.
Sure.
And one day my phone rings at home and my mom answers and she's like, hold on. And she's like, it's Will Lee. And I was like, I'm 18 with a mullet, and I was just like, I'm like, what? So I answered the phone and Will, so amazing. And he's like, man, I want to come to because I invited him to come to the show at Carnegie Hall. And I said, I want you to be my guest. And he said, can I bring my girlfriend? And I was like, yeah. So he came to the show and we met and became just really fast friends, because Will is originally from Texas. He's from Huntsville, Texas, is where he graduated high school from. And so we really hit it off. My dad's side of the family is from Jersey. So every Christmas we would go up to Jersey and spend time and go into New York City and just to have a good Christmas time. And so I would go to Will's place. I get to stay with him. He would take me to sessions, take me to the Letterman tapings. Just so much. He just showed me so much. And still to this day, he's one of my dearest friends. And if I ever have any question about anything, I always ask him, or is this cool? And he'll tell me if it's cool or not. And but he's everything about him I just I love dearly. And I'm so fortunate to have gotten him to learn from him and soak up all the different things that he has shown me.
And wow, that
the power of a letter.
Right. Yeah. Don't ever be afraid to write. Yeah. Don't ever be afraid to write to your heroes, I guess.
No. And you mentioned the other two, and let me go to the next one, which this one for me was a really big one. And it wasn't I didn't get to spend as much time because it was later in his life. But I got to spend time with Joe Osborne before he had passed. And that was a really cool experience. We were on tour with Kenny Chesney for a year. And in Kenny Chesney's band, the horn leader was Jim Horn, the legendary sax player who recorded with Steely Dan and, I mean, just Rolling Stones and everybody. Well, we went through Shreveport on the Chesney tour. And Jim and I became fast friends on that tour just because I knew who Jim was and I respected him just tremendously. And I would love to hear story after story every night. Yeah. And when we rolled through Shreveport, he was like, hey, man, you want to go meet Joe? And I was just like, are you kidding me? And he's like, yeah, he's going to be recording when we're there and we can go meet him. And so Jim and I got in a taxi and drove to this little studio in Shreveport. And there's Joe in there. And so, and Joe and Jim caught up. They haven't seen each other in years. And it was really cool. So that was the first time I got to meet Joe. And then from then on out, I would make drives over. It was only like a 3-hour drive from where I lived. And Joe and I would go have ribs and go fishing. And I would just ask him questions about bass. And he was just amazing. Just so amazing. Because if you're a Joe fan, you know. I mean, Joe is one of the unique voices of our instrument. When you hear one downbeat, you immediately, oh, there's Joe. That's awesome. And man, just I learned a lot from him. He really, just so wise and amazing.
That is so cool.
And then the other mentor you had mentioned, and this is the person I want to talk about last because it's just, and I'm going to get verklempt and I'm going to get a little sad, but Michael Rhodes. Couldn't he to use a Star Wars analogy, he's my Yoda. He's the guy that any question I ever had, any high level stuff, very heady song stuff, he could explain to me. And just by observing him, I got to meet him the very first CMA Awards that we played in New York City in 2005. Rhodes was there playing with Brooks and Dunn with an all-star band. And I obviously was a fan, just like I was with Worf. I had transcribed a lot of Rhodes stuff, his Rodney Crowell stuff and his Hank Williams Jr. bass playing, all that stuff. I was already a huge fan. So getting to meet him, and we hit it off instantly. It was just the strangest, kind of this very love at first sight. It was a very weird experience. Like, oh my gosh, we both felt this connection, and we tried to hang out as much as we could there. So then I tried to see him whenever I was in Nashville. We would try to have dinner, or if he was on the road coming through when he was with Bonamassa, I got to see him a lot with that. Yeah. And it was very hard losing him. He's a big one, but he left the greatest catalog of bass playing.
Right.
And if you want to know how to make a song feel, man.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Man, I got to tell you, like, I've met Michael several times. Every time I've met him, and we're talking, when I say several times, like years apart from each time.
Right.
And every time I've met Michael, hi, Dino, how are you? He always remembered my name. Just you could understand why people wanted to work with him, not just because of his playing, because he was such an amazing player, but just such an amazing personality and amazing human being.
There was a wisdom and an elegance that he walked with that was different than a mortal person.
Yeah, it's funny because Michael was one of those artists that, from a manufacturer's standpoint and an artist relations standpoint. 1 minute he'd be on a tour and he'd be in front of a Fender Bassman, and then he'd be on another tour in front of an Ashdown, and then in another tour he'd be in front of an SVT. And I would get asked all the time, like, is Michael an Ampeg artist? And my go-to reply, and I only say this about a few artists, my go-to reply has always been, Michael can play whatever Michael wants to play.
That's brilliant.
And if he wants something, if he wants an Ampeg rig, I'd be more than happy to help him out with an Ampeg rig. And that's, and like I said, there's only and Dom's heard me say this before. I would think like Pino is probably in that same ball, in that same category. It's like these guys are legends. They play whatever suits the gig that they're on.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Like Dom was talking about the different basses, at the session. Amps are the same thing.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to put a quote up here. Actually, it looks like one of your buddies here, TJ. Actually, I can't put a quote because I don't have the producing button, Aaron. I was going to put a quote here from TJ Calloway.
Oh, TJ's an amazing engineer in Dallas.
So
and
it says Aden is a first call session guy here in the Dallas Dallas Denton Fort Worth area, I'm assuming. I've been fortunate enough to engineer and hang out on a couple of sessions he was on, and he just nails it right away. He's a beast. So that's from your buddy TJ.
I love TJ. He's a great dude. I don't get to see him enough.
That's cool. There's a validation right there.
Yeah, and it's a kind of segue into that. So after I come off the road with Miranda, that's kind of the normal thing as you do a road gig and then you move into the session side of things.
Yeah.
And I did not get moved to Nashville, family things and just a lot of different things didn't work out. But everything was a blessing with that. In this area, the studio scene is really amazing. And I have been so blessed with, because, I had geared up with my bass collection and preamps and everything I was doing to do studio work. And when I came off the road, I was like, do I need to be in LA? Do I need to be in Nashville? What do I need to do this? And then all of a sudden it was like this studio, and this studio, and this studio. And there's so many studios. There are 3 studios primarily in Fort Worth that I work at that are great. And then I go to Houston and Austin quite a bit. I go to Tyler. There's a great studio out there.
Okay.
I'm doing close to about an album worth of material a week.
Wow.
Wow.
A lot, there's a lot of single song recordings. A lot of people do that, but then there'll be some. So there'll be like, different single recordings all during the week, or then sometimes a full project. And so the recording aspect of that has been really tremendous down here. I've been so pleasantly happy, and it's really, for the most part, it's all great music.
Yeah. And you didn't have to go to LA.
No, it's kind of cool. I get to be here in Texas where I grew up, and Texas, and I'm proud. Of us down here in Texas. Texas has a cool thing musically that's different, and I'm just glad that people are down here being able to record it and capture what's going on with the artists and what's happening.
Hey, tell me how did the 3-string bass come about? Was that a studio thing or a live thing?
No, okay. It's a great story, and I've been kind of researching the lineage of the 3-stringed instrument, and it all started kind of back in the 1600s. 3-string uprights.
Okay.
They thought that it sounded better than the 4-string, the tone of it. So for a couple hundred years, I think that they said the Germans were the ones that were all 4 strings. But like the French and the Italians and all them played 3 strings. So that lineage goes way back. But how I came into it, so Pete Anderson, who is Dwight Yoakam's guitar player, producer from all the Heyday stuff.
Yeah.
He contacted a buddy of mine who owns Glendale Guitars, a really great guitar company. Pete wanted to make the perfect honky-tonk bass.
Okay.
Right? And this is, to quote Pete, he said, get rid of the G string because that you don't need to play high. Make it wide spacing to slow you down because you don't need to play fast. And he says don't play above the 5th fret. But I'm all the way up all the time. But that was how he designed it. So he had one built, and this was in 2007, I believe. He had one built, and then he ended up not getting it for some reason. And so my buddy contacted me and was like, dude, I got this 3-string bass that Pete designed, and it's really cool. And I was kind of at a time, I'm literally playing the same 20 songs for 2 years.
Right.
You kind of get in a mode where you're like, I need something to spark me and do something.
Yeah.
So I got this bass, and it was the spark that I needed, because it changed the way that I thought about playing a lot. Dino and I were talking about this you're taught in normal school efficiency of motion, right? You want a lot more of this than this, right?
Right.
And you want this, but on a 3-string, you only have 1 octave, so there is way more of this.
Yeah.
And I kind of dig that. So I fell in love with this instrument, and now I have 4 of them. I've got the first one was a 50s style P, like a slab body 51P. And then I have a jazz bass that's made out of the stage wood from the jazz club Caravan of Dreams here in Fort Worth. Wow. And that's a really cool jazz. And then I have 2 split Ps. And this is one right here.
That is so cool.
Really cool. Yeah.
Now, round wounds or flat wounds?
These are flats.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've got flats on 2 and rounds on 2.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's just
a binding in that. I didn't see that binding at first around the body.
Yeah, here.
Wow.
Yeah, he does beautiful work. It's just even the back is really pretty. Red, it's kind of red. But it's really nice, man. He nails it. Now, because the hard part is you have to have a custom bridge and you have to have custom pickups.
Yeah.
Yep.
For the 3-string, and both guys that have made them, after they make a couple, they're kind of like, I'm not doing that anymore. This really stinks. But Rob, actually, he's been making some for some guys, and I'm getting different orders, and they're really cool. I've only done 1 gig ever that the singer said I had to have. It was like a high E flat, and I couldn't get that on this bass. So
now, okay, so I have to ask you the $1 million question is, the first time you just brought your 3-string to a gig, like, have you done that? Where you, I know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I play live. I play almost all 3 strings now.
Really?
Yeah, I play it in all the gigs. But when I first brought it, there was very much of, obviously the E string is the E, so it's down there. Sure. You know that. But you're so used to this top string being the G.
Yeah.
There was a lot of 5-1. If I would accidentally hit what I thought was the G string and it's really a D, and I'm like, oh no. It was a couple weeks of that, like the brain. Yeah. But once I got over it, I don't have any issues now. I can jump back and forth. And then I don't play 5 strings, but I have basses that are 4 strings that are tuned BEAD.
Okay. Yeah.
And which is just like the 3 with a low string.
Sure.
So that works in my brain pretty well.
Okay. Yeah. I was just gonna say, it's like I would get that same feeling, like, the first couple of gigs, like leaving the house without the cell phone. It's like just like, oh man, I don't have a 4-string. But
it was very much that, where I wouldn't, in the beginning, I would bring 2 basses, a 4-string and a 3, right. Just in case.
Just in case.
But then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm cool. I can just bring the 3s and I'll be,
I get anxious just bringing a 4-string to a gig.
I know.
Because I'm primarily a 5-string guy.
Right.
I like having a P bass on the
gig. So for me, because I just don't like the big wide 5 necks. I just like a regular P neck. The 3-string neck on this is actually, they're jazz necks.
Okay.
Right. So this is just a straight ahead, like a 60s jazz neck, real nice. So it doesn't feel weird.
Yeah.
But I have the hip shot double lever, and it can do a D and a C.
Oh wow.
Okay. And I love that because I can get down to that low C. Yeah. And it speaks pretty well.
Wow.
I mean, it's pretty legitimate, and you're 1 note shy from a 5-string, but I kind of get it like that. It's fun.
That's crazy. That's awesome. I assume that the typical, your go-to movements that you're not even thinking about when you're doing a fill or something like that, where it's kind of almost pre-programmed in a way. That's probably totally gets rewritten, which is a cool thing. It's like almost like
you got to think, yeah,
more neural pathways. You're like creating new pathways.
Now you got to think notes instead of positions.
totally. Yeah, and it's really, it's just a crazy. The worst is when you're in drop C, and then that octave becomes a minor 6.
Right.
It's like it's so weird.
Yeah,
that is wild. Now, is he still building 3-string basses?
Yeah, he still builds 4s and 3s and guitars too.
We'll have to after the broadcast, when we repost this broadcast, we'll have to post some links.
Yeah, Brimstone Guitars. He's amazing woodworker.
That is so cool. Now, all right, let's talk about amps. So
yes,
my first question to you is the SVT-MP, the mic pre, or the SVT-DI? Which do you prefer?
You're making me so excited right now. And my wife would know if she heard you ask me that question. My wife would be like, "Oh my gosh, really?" She knows. She's heard me talk about this way too much. Okay, so I wanted to say one little thing to go into this. At the time that I had discovered these DIs, I had joined on to Ampeg, and Ted Kornblum was the guy, and he would always be at all the award shows backstage. And Ted and I hit it off, and I loved Ted so much. And when he got rid of the company, he came to me and said, "Hey man, promise me, do this for my family. Will you please play Ampeg always?"
Really?
Like he'd really pull me aside, and I was like, "Man," I shook his hand and I said, "Yes, I will. I will always." And I was like, "I have no reason not to." And it was a cool thing, and I loved him from that. But that was the time I had gotten one of the DIs, I remember, and fallen in love with it and being just like, oh. So the question of the DI versus the MP, I prefer them both for different situations.
Okay.
The SVT DI I prefer for live.
Okay.
And the reason I prefer it for live, now it will work great in the studio. It's not, that doesn't mean that, no. It's, if I have to use it in the studio, I'm like, wonderful.
Yep.
But I think live, the SVT DI is amazing live because it sends to the front of house. You've got a tube option, and you've got a really great, that Crimson Audio transformer that's in there. It sounds really good and warm. And if you turn off the tube, you've got a good passive transformer. Right. So you have two options to send to front of house, which is awesome. And then you have the option to hit your amp with a tube pre out of the 1/4 inch out. And I find that so useful because my main rig right now has been the RB 115 with my SVT DI hitting it with the tube. Man, it sounds great. So I think live, that is my favorite rig. In the studio, I prefer the MP more because of the gain knob on it and the pad options, because I can run mic level or line level. And some studios that, like, if I have my way and everything is what I want to do, you're going to bypass it, and I'm going to run that thing in straight hot at that line level and bypass all the pre's and just hit the tape machine with just that tube pre.
Yep.
And that thing sounds so good. So that's why I love that for the studio, because then I have the options of micro line level, and it's super good. And I don't know if I want to tell too many of my secrets.
I'm like,
I should step back for a second.
That's smart.
It's funny because I see your Instagram posts, and I got to tell you, let me see if I can. I think I have sharing capabilities where I can share my screen here.
Yeah.
Let me see. But like a lot of your Instagram posts, you will show like your pedal board.
Yeah.
And let me see here. Is this going to come through? Window? Yeah. Let's see if this comes. Oh, Aaron. Yeah. I can't share it right now. But anyways, I'm going to stop sharing that.
There goes.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you.
That's awesome.
So this is
That was the other night.
Before being 2 112s, is that what that is?
2 112s. Yeah, I got those recently and just love them.
so this is your studio board then, I'm assuming, because it's got the mic pre on it.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. All right. And I'll go back to this picture then. Yeah, it's the V4 and then 2 single 12s with the DI on the board here.
Yeah, with the DI hitting the tube pre hitting that even.
So
it's more tubes are better. It's just all tubelicious.
And that, it's funny because I have been on the search for, let me see if I can stop sharing my screen here. Oh, I'll show one more bass. We call bass porn here, but
you need one more 112 for one for each string.
Right. Yeah, one for each string.
Ooh, I like that, Dom. That's good.
So
that bass in that photo is gorgeous, man. What is that?
That is, man. I am not a expensive taste bass player, meaning I love cheap basses and then like tweaking them out and making them really cool.
Yeah.
And I had enough things laying around to build a 50 style P bass.
Nice.
So I put it together and I made it my Keith Ferguson tribute bass, the bass player from the Fabulous Thunderbirds.
Oh, nice.
And he was an amazing bass player. But there's a lot of people around here that knew him really well and played in bands. So I've interviewed a lot of them and found out all these details about what strings he used, what pickup he used. So I was able to tweak it, and it turned out to be a really good looking bass.
That is cool. Awesome. What I was going to say is, ever since I've been following you on Instagram and seeing your posts too, I've been on the unending search for a mic pre because I've got like 5 or 6 DIs, and I found a buddy of mine that was willing to trade me his mic pre for a DI, so it was an even swap. I gave him.
That's a good deal.
So now I've got the mic pre here in the studio, but I wanted to pick your brain. Like, what do you prefer live versus in the studio?
And I'll go ahead and say this too, because I did a lot of shootouts. Before I had my Pro Tools rig up and running, I would have to bug all my engineer friends and be like, "Hey, can I bum an hour after the session, and can we go through 10 different P basses and listen to?" And they would be like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah, but please help me." But in all that, because I borrowed at one point, I borrowed every major tube DI that I could find, and did a shootout, and really like fine tuned and found out a couple things. And my big finding, and it's not like a secret, the SVT DI has a 12 AU7 in it.
Yes.
And I prefer that contour of that tube. That's the same tube that other popular tube DI guys use.
Yep.
Compared to the 12AX7, which is what a lot of them use. The 12AX7 to me is a little too much high end and it's a little too gainy. I want it a little more buttery and soft.
Yeah.
And that UA7 seems to fit the perfect balance.
Sure.
I was using an AY7. There's a company that uses that in their DIs, and that was awesome, real low gain, but the AU7 just is a little bit more sparkle.
Yeah.
So that being said, in my MP, I've got 2 AU7s in there.
Oh,
because the MP uses an AX7 in the first spot and then a UA7 in the second spot. And I had talked to Obeid about this. I ran into him at a guitar show.
Yep.
I was like walking down the aisle and I'm such a nerd. I actually know what Obeid looks like. And like he walked by and I'm like, oh my God. Because I had so many questions and I was like, dude, talk to me for like 5 minutes here. And he was telling me that second slot has to be a UA7.
Oh.
So the first slot can be mixed around.
Yep.
I think if you were using this as a mic pre, the 12AX7 is your best bet.
Okay.
But as a strictly bass DI, I like the U7 in it. It's real nice.
I'm gonna try. See, I'm gonna steal that idea. I'm sorry,
dude. Go. That's
It's a good tip. Good tip.
So we had another gentleman of yours, friend of yours, AJ Burton.
I see that.
Love working with you every week, man. Every week is a different bass and a different sound. Pleasure to get in the mix for you.
Yeah, he's our monitor engineer at a church that I play at. I've got a really great church gig that pretty much kept me alive during the shutdown. I mean, without it was good. And I've been there for like 15 years now.
Okay.
But yeah, AJ does the ears there, and he's awesome. And yeah, every week at church. So it's the Met Church out of Keller, Texas, and every week I bring a different bass. I know probably, we have a front of house engineer, we have a broadcast engineer, we've got all these different engineers, and they have to deal with me. And I'm always asking them, man, what did this bass sound like? Oh, what did that bass sound like? But every week it's a different instrument, and it just depends. Awesome. And yeah, it's silly.
I did the same thing for years. This church in Beverly Hills, and this one day I brought a Hofner, and I was like playing it McCartney style, the pick and everything. And the guy's like, "Look, dude, I know that's amazing. That is like the worst bass for worship. It is so distracting. It's the big sound."
That's true. I love that. That would be great. That'd be a great T-shirt. Worst bass for worship.
But that is actually funny. Wow. But at least I would rather have that than have when you ask a front of house guy, hey, I'm getting an awful slap back here.
I know that came out of nowhere.
Are you hearing it too? Let me see if I can fix that. But
I don't have it.
Installation on too.
I think it's gone.
Nope.
No, I have it.
No, you have it. I'm spreading it. Wow. Hold on. Let me see if I can and see if that goes away. Nope, and it doesn't. All right. But yeah, I have that. It's better that than you run into the sound engineer that's like, dude, it's bass. It sounds fine. Like they could care less what the bass sounds like, really.
Right. Yeah, and I always try, like you. Sometimes I'll push it, and like you said, I'll bring that's the worst bass for worship type of situation, and I try to force it. There's been a couple when like. The broadcast engineer will come out of the room and he'll be like, dude, that's no, we can't use that. I'm like, well, thank you for telling me. I'll get my P bass and we'll be good. And yeah.
I would rather have somebody tell me that than to just like not.
Right. And it's rare that he does that, but I'm glad that he does because I think that's important. And that being said, like every situation, be it live, the broadcast situation is a completely different situation. Versus studio situation. Sure. Certain basses are golden in those situations. Put them in another one, and they're horrible.
Yeah,
it's interesting. True. You have to kind of know what you're dealing with.
Yeah. There's another awesome post here from Wendelin, which is a cool name, very cool name.
Any reason he put me on the right track?
Yeah, she was one of my first bass students at.
Cool.
And she went on to go to Berkeley. And graduate there, and she's a badass, and so she lives in Austin. That's awesome.
Are you still teaching? Do you still?
I am. I do. I teach some that. So when I was in college, my major was elementary music ed with jazz emphasis studies.
Okay.
So I guess I wanted to teach bebop tunes to kindergartners. Is what I'm qualified to do. But no, I've been doing like a lot of private stuff with small kids. And really, it's been amazing because I'm of the mindset you just have to tell these kids what's up, and they'll get it. I have 6-year-olds that can read Nashville number charts and transpose.
Wow!
And it's just because I told them what it is, and they go, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Dude, if somebody would have told me that when I was young, like it would have saved decades of understanding." But it's just like I really love being real with these kids and letting them know this is what's up, man. Let's do this. And then I teach out at Weatherford College, where I graduated from. I'm back out there teaching adjunct bass.
Oh, right on. Cool.
Yeah. So it's really fun, doing that level too, working on the high end, heady, a lot of jazz stuff, Jamerson and cool stuff.
That's cool.
It's I miss that atmosphere, and every now and then I'll shoot down to Boston and hang out with some of my friends at Berkeley, like Danny Moe and Bailey and those guys. And it's just a different I miss that atmosphere, not just of school, but just hanging out with a bunch of bass players and talking,
Right.
not even talking gear, just talking music. Like, what are you listening to? What did you? I really do miss that.
The like communal hunger to be better and to like find the next thing. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I try to have I try to have coffee with a lot of the bass players in this area. Almost weekly, just to be like, hey, let's go get a donut and coffee and talk. What have you been listening to? What have you been using? What have you been doing? And it's just, I think that's important, the community of it all.
Don, who do you have coffee with yesterday morning?
I was gonna say Dino sent me on an errand to drop off some gear. Just drop off some gear, and I go to meet John Button and Hutch Hutchinson at coffee here in Studio City, and it was like one of the best mornings of my life.
They're sending me pictures of Dom holding all these basses that Hutch recorded with, and I'm sitting here in my studio going, yeah, okay, yeah, that's really good on you.
Hutch is like, yeah, come over to the house. I'm right around the corner. I'm like, really, I should. Okay.
Did you get to see us talk that Takamine?
Oh, I don't think
it's like an arch top. Oh man,
the Washburn.
The Washburn.
So pretty.
At least there's one that he showed me. I mean,
I know the Takamine.
John and I were both just like passing bases back and forth. Like,
that's like, I couldn't be happier about that.
Speaking of a guy that has a bunch of bases too.
Yes, yeah. He's on my list of the studio bait guys, and he's got a long list.
Hutch is he's a Boston guy for one thing. He's a Boston native, so whenever he's back in town, I usually hit him up and we get out to at least one or two Red Sox games when he's not touring. So
that's so great.
It's funny because all the times we hang out, I feel bad. We talk more about baseball than we actually do about bass, and it's like, hey, wait. As on my drive home, I'll be like, oh damn, I forgot to ask him about that. Something bass related.
And I'll say this: you just were saying Red Sox. I'll say this. The whole time I was with Miranda for 12 years, the coolest gigs, in my opinion, we ever did were baseball stadiums.
Yeah.
And the coolest for me when we got to do Fenway, and I just that was magical.
That's
amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah, it's funny you say that because it's not. They didn't start doing concerts in Fenway till I'm going to say maybe. Well, it's probably been 10 years now, but prior to that, we were like, concerts in Fenway Park? Are you kidding me? But as a spectator too, it's a phenomenal venue to see a show.
As a performer, and this can sound so jaded, rock star. And I remember reading interviews when I was younger, like, oh, this is stupid. But it's like you play all these different rooms and different venues, and a football stadium is really awesome, but it's too big.
Yeah.
And a baseball stadium is it's the perfect shape and size for music. I don't know. It makes more sense to watch a band in a baseball stadium.
Yeah.
And those were my favorite large rooms to ever play.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's there's another concert series coming through Boston, and they're all playing Fenway. And of course, Fenway now has a concert hall off the back of it called the MGM Music Hall, which I think it's like a 2,000 or 3,000 seat.
That's cool.
Venue. Yeah. So, hey, listen, we're running. We're just about out. Well, we are out of time. I know we went about 5 minutes over here, but I have. Dom, don't laugh at me. We run. I call this Dino's 10 or quick 10. So it's basically 10 quick questions that I run by you, and you only have a couple of seconds to think of the answer to each question. Okay. So it's kind of like rapid fire 10 quick questions. So yeah, take.
Dino, what we need to do after this now, we need to create just to shame people a little bit, or make them feel really good. I don't know. Out of the 10 questions, we need to create an algorithm. So there's an archetype at the end of it that like you're the blah 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 type basis.
You just said the wrong word there. Algorithm. Yeah. From the Greek word algorithm. Anyways. All right. So you ready for this?
Okay, I'm ready.
Number 1, P bass or jazz bass?
P.
Number 2, passive or active?
Passive.
Number 3, B15, SVT, or Pro Series?
B15.
Okay. Number 4, cable or wireless?
Cable.
Okay. Number 5.
But I really had a great wireless with when I was yeah, cable.
Number 5, pick or fingers?
Fingers.
Okay. Number 6, IEMs or floor wedges?
Wedges.
Okay. 7, I know the answer to this. Pedals or no pedals?
I like no pedals. Is what I like. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I have tuners and all that, but no like really effects.
Okay. All right.
It's all preamps pedals, all preamps.
Okay. Getting away from gear. Number 8, window or aisle?
Aisle.
Okay. Number 9, high bunk or low bunk?
Low.
Okay. And then number 10, black with white piping or silver and blue?
Silver and blue.
Okay. There you go.
Nice.
There's no prize or anything. We're just
I love it. It made me think. I love that. It's all good.
It's and you're right. I like for number 7, pedals and no pedals. I thought you would have said pedals, but I see where you're coming from. You're right.
I have preamp pedals, but no effects. Like
yeah. You don't have the big Doug Wimbish.
I have a decent pedal rig, but it's hard to. I use it about once or twice a year.
That's awesome. And that's the other thing I just wanted to touch on real quick. You've got me looking at scrap wood in my garage to start building my pedals, my pedal boards.
Yeah.
Because I can't afford any.
So that wood on the pedal board, that's the stage from Caravan of Dreams.
Oh, really?
So I had gotten, whenever they closed that jazz club, I got a bunch of the wood from the stage, and it was a club where everybody played, like all the jazz greats, and I grew up playing there. So and so it had a lot of good mojo in that wood. Yeah. So I made some pedal boards, and then I made a bass out of it. Yeah. That's
awesome. But anyways,
you're right. You can do that. Get you some
You've
scrap.
inspired me to start looking at scraps of wood up in my garage.
Wood flooring.
Planks and, so a little bit of hardware and some rubber feet. You got a perfect pedal board.
Exactly.
Multiple tiers. That's what we need.
That's what 2x4s are for.
That's right.
The pedal board's going to weigh 100 pounds by the time I'm done. Anyways, Aden, man, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. It was so much fun.
I like I said, I don't know why we didn't have you on sooner, but we should have. My apologies for that.
No,
but
thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. Everybody, thanks for watching. Another 2 weeks, another SVT time. I don't have anybody lined up, but we will keep you posted on who's coming in, and hopefully, Aden, at some point we'll have you back on the show too.
Yeah,
once you have a couple more 3 strings built up, we'll get those back on too. But guys, thank you so much. Haji, thank you for taking care of the links in the background, and Aaron for posting stuff. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. All right, guys. See ya.
God bless. Thank y'all.